This is Ben.
And this is Keith, and this is Main Street Lutherans.
So today we're going to talk about the Churchwide Assembly that happened in July and then just into August this summer. We're in 2025 for anybody who's listening in later years. So Phoenix, Arizona, site of the Churchwide Assembly. The Churchwide Assembly brought up some ideas for me, some things we talked about in prior episodes, actually. So we have this Churchwide Assembly. This follows the year after the youth gathering in New Orleans. This is in the Churchwide Assemblies in Phoenix. It's where our church gathers to make our big decisions, elect our leaders. We have these things. We also have a rostered leaders, a gathering that brings clergy together for a weekend, I think. And that happens every 3 years too. It seems like it's in that year between Churchwide Assembly and the youth gathering on the other side. So that should be next year. We have all these gatherings for particular groups, but I think we have smaller groups. And so one of the things I was thinking about is, one of the things I really want to go to is Theology Beer Camp. That is put on by Homebrewed Christianity. And this year it's going to be in St. Paul, Minnesota. And it's something I want to do, but it conflicts with something I do every year now, which is Santa School in Midland, Michigan. So my particular thing. But we've been doing the Festival of Homiletics. Keith and I went last year. I attended virtually this year, but I also, a couple weeks ago, went to the Hymn Society, which was a gathering of hymn people. So lots of Lutherans. We had some Lutheran dignitaries speak there, but a lot of hymns. So I went to an after-hours thing, a hymn sing in a historically black church in Detroit, and it was fabulous. Probably 800 or so people singing hymns together with a pipe organ, a Hammond B3 organ, and a grand piano up by the altar. So I was thinking about all these groups.
That was also a combined event with another gathering?
There's an organization called the National Association of Negro Musicians, and they were having a festival or some sort of conference at the Renaissance Center in Detroit. And so they brought these two groups together to have a very specific gospel-style hymn sing. And it had lectures in it too, so it was kind of interesting that way.
That just sounds amazing.
It was wild. I didn't even notice there was a drum set on stage until the very last song. Right? I texted a guy at work who told me that he'd gone to Morehouse College, and I noticed that two of the speakers were from Morehouse. And so I sent him a message on our work message system on Teams. And about 3 days later, I get a message from him, "Hey, I was there too." But we didn't see each other because there are just so many people there. So what I've been thinking about, and I actually entered a conversation with Carla Christopher, who we had on a couple episodes ago, about the idea of having like-minded people in our church gather for a smaller sort of event. And I've been thinking about what groups would support that sort of thing and finding a place that could host back-to-back-to-back events that are our church. But maybe we can use some synergy there so that a group doesn't have to do all the planning to get together and we could just have it available. So anybody that's listening, if you have an idea for that, if you've got a group that wants to get together, a lot of this is people that have similar demographics, people who share something in common. It could be, ELCA Lego fans or something like that, but more likely it'll be, youth ministry people or people who are, LGBTQIA plus folks might want to have a gathering space. But if we can move all these, if we can arrange a place where it could be very easy to do that, I'm thinking like a college campus where there are dormitories and food available, so we don't have to do so much planning. That's my idea. Of course, the Churchwide Assembly is too big for that, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So we have the VP with us today.
Woo-hoo.
Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Good to see you again.
So Imran Siddiqui, VP of the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. There's a whole 2 episodes of this back last year, I think in September, so almost a year ago, we talked. And we talked about your role as the head of the ELCA Church Council. And you had a little bit of responsibility here at the Churchwide Assembly.
Yeah, just a little, not terribly much. I lit the candle.
Yeah.
every before every plenary.
And you got to give
I,
some awards.
oh yes, I the outgoing church council. I got to stand up there with a nice looking rondelle, which is if you've ever been to Lutheran Center and you know that mosaic that's on the wall when you walk in. So they made a little, I don't know, a box or something that's really nice, and they give it to everyone. So we took
Oh,
pictures
wow.
with everyone that was leaving, along with the presiding bishop. And then I got to also read a commendation. They call it citation, but it sounds like I'm giving a speeding ticket for Secretary Rothmar. And then I flubbed some very important states while I was doing so. But aside from that, and I gave a report, about 10 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes of report. But aside from that, I generally, that was basically my role there. And presiding Bishop Eaton was the one who was chairing the whole thing. So she was the one that had all the work, really.
There are a lot of jokes about the Robert's Rules of Order. If so all of the actions are on YouTube. They were live streamed, and I think they'll be on there forever,
I assume so.
or at
Yeah.
least 3 years, maybe. I think the stuff from Columbus is still on there from three
Yeah.
years ago. So probably be there for a long time. So if you want to see how it happened, we'll include links to that. So overall, how did Churchwide Assembly go?
Oh, I always like Churchwide Assembly. I always like running into people. And I know a lot of people were like, "Oh, Phoenix, this sort of thing." But I was coming from Atlanta, which was the week that I was gone had a record heat wave with a heat index of 106. And that includes was it the temperature's probably 95 and the humidity's probably 90%. And I went somewhere where maybe it was 110, but humidity, I looked at my phone, it was 8%. And I said, this ain't bad. I mean, I didn't think it was too terrible. And then also, of course, the hotels are like a block away from the convention center, and we spent all day in the convention center that's super air conditioned and that sort of thing. But the fun part was just running into folks and talking to them. But the weird part this time was, in previous churchwide assemblies that I'd been to, I got to, kind of experience it. And this time I was working, and so I had to run back and forth to do various things. I think church council met a few times during it. So we had separate meetings and lunch and, that sort of thing. And every time I had to go somewhere in a certain amount of time, I'd get stopped by about four or five people, which I'm like, oh yeah, more people know me right now. They're going to stop me on the way. But in the end, I just enjoyed talking with folks. I mean, that was kind of the fun part, getting talking to folks from all across the country. And, people like a youth voting member came up to me and said, "Hey, I want to try to pass something. Like, do you have any tips?" And so I was working out with her. I'm like, "Well, this is what you probably want to try to do." And like, this is a good way to try to sell it. And, like little bits of Robert's rules on, sort of help on the side a little bit for some
Yeah,
other people. But yeah, I mean, it was fun. I mean, food was great in the convention center. That always helps. And it was a good time. Yeah.
that's awesome. I
I've
really wish
never
I could have
been
been there.
to, yeah, I've never been to a churchwide assembly, but I have been to several youth gatherings, and I think there's kind of a similar vibe to it. And you wouldn't necessarily think that, given that, there's a fairly significant median age difference between the two. But there is something about gathering these large numbers of people together who may not agree on everything, but they're all passionate about the church. And they love their congregations, their synods, their organizations, whomever they're there to represent. But somehow they accepted that it was part of their call to attend this event together and to, represent, to vote, to ask questions, to challenge, whatever it might be. But they're all there, they're all there for the same reason. And that just has a certain spirit and a certain power to it that you just don't get to experience all the time, regardless of your faith or your role in the church or your work in the world, whatever it might be. And there is something neat about that kind of experience, no matter how many times you've done it.
Yeah. And then, well, especially shows itself during worship services, right? Where there aren't people arguing against each other.
Yeah, yeah,
Because, in the end, it's a big long business meeting, but the worship services are when people come together and are able to be one together. And some of the conversations get a little heated, so it's nice to have time for rest and prayer and song. And so yeah, and I remember going to the youth gathering, and there was that when they have the big huge gatherings in the evenings, right?
Mhm.
Whereas in Churchwide Assembly, you're there with everyone all day.
Right.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting that way.
Well, and they're what, 800,
Yeah.
800 voting members?
800 voting members, roughly. I think there were a little bit more than that, but
Yeah.
800 voting members. Then you have the staff, right, that have to, help the whole thing. And then
Mhm.
you have various visitors and congregational observers. And in the end, it ends up being like 1,500
Oh, wow.
folks. Yeah. And so, and then you have people from other denominations that are coming to visit, and lots of. I mean, it may not be 1,500 in the room at all times, but over the week, right? Kind
Right.
of. But there's the
Gotcha.
800 voting members for sure in the middle, and then the staff has to be there the whole time, and so that's kind of an interesting thing as well. So, but lots of people. I remember the first churchwide assembly I went to was the one in New Orleans in 2016 or so, and that was the one with the Grace Gathering. So the worship services had over 2,000 people, and I was like, "Wow, 2,000 Lutherans in a room!" Like I
And then you went
never.
to the youth gathering.
And then I went to youth gathering, and then I was like, How many?" Like, and they were like, "Well, it's a little lower this year. It's only 15,000." You're like, "Oh my goodness."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. 800, 1,500, when they all start to sing together, that's
Yep.
that's meaningful. Yeah. Yeah.
When they're Lutherans and they sing
Right.
together. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can't speak for other denominations, right?
Right.
That's right.
Well, and the thing is that unfortunately on the YouTube, it's the folks aren't mic'd, right? You can't really hear
Right.
the singing. But there is one video that the ELCA put up on its social networks, and it might be on YouTube too, but it's at least on Facebook, where there's someone that has a mic and a camera down in the pit or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and you can hear everyone singing, and it's like fantastic, and that's it will send chills up your spine. But yeah, everyone singing together is where it really comes together.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for we talked about those camp experiences or the assemblies that we do, and I think all of those have an element of that. I remember going to a thing at Wartburg Seminary and having the chapel thing. It's just mostly teenagers that were there as part of a AAL thing before they formed Thrivent. And the singing there was great, even though it's high school kids that aren't supposed to sing hymns, right? And still it was wonderful. So yeah. Well, so did anything happen? I mean, it
Oh no,
was
nothing much.
nothing much.
No. Well, obviously, the big news items that came out of it is, of course, and we knew going in there was going to be a new presiding bishop and there was going to be a new secretary, as both presiding Bishop Eaton and Secretary Rothmeyer indicated that they were retiring, and so that was kind of dominated a lot of the pre-assembly chatter. Dominated the chatter while we were there at assembly, and it was the big things that we kind of had to deal with. Like that was our goal. We're going to come out with somebody that's going to lead this church,
Well,
especially for the
especially
next
with
six
the
years.
the world's focus on the new pope,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right. And so that's kind of a little ironic, right? Because we ended up electing Hill Curry from Metro Chicago, and apparently what we'll find out is that his first call, Shekinah Chapel. I'm probably saying it wrong, but that call was literally a few miles from where the Pope grew up. And
Yeah.
so it's like kind of in the same general area. So I don't know, maybe Bishop Curry and the Pope can talk about, deep dish pizza or
And the
something,
White
Right.
and
Sox.
the White Sox. They're both White Sox fans. So that's
Yeah.
that's the other thing. I
There's
mean, it's
something in
kind
the
of
holy water in Chicago.
yeah, yeah, it was very, very funny, all those ties. But yeah, that was the first election, right? So we did the
Yeah.
presiding bishop first, and one of the reasons is because presiding bishop, of course, is open to rostered leaders or roster. I'm sorry, pastors in the ELCA. Only because when I say roster leaders, that includes deacons, and deacons cannot be a minister or cannot be a bishop because that has to be a minister of word and sacrament. The secretary is open to everybody, so they figure that folks that may, if their names are put forward for presiding bishop, they may choose to go that route
Right.
instead, right? It'd be really ironic if someone, or really sad if someone got elected secretary and then said, "You know what? I'd rather have this job instead," sort
Right.
of thing.
We'll go to number two.
Right. So yeah, and that went. The presiding bishop election went 5 rounds, and we knew it. I think we knew it would, right? And
Mhm.
and there was lots of people jockeying for the role. It seemed like, and it ended up being Bishop Curry after the third ballot. He went up pretty high, and then kind of kept that margin a little bit and through the fifth ballot, and then it was very, it was a very powerful moment because he is of course the first, the African descent, first person of color who's a presiding bishop that we're going to have. So that was incredibly powerful. And then in the secretary election as well, it was kind of interesting. The numbers just kind of went up and down. And we elected C.C. Mills, who's assistant to the bishop currently in North Carolina and will be until this fall, I think November 1st when she starts. And Bishop Curry's going to start October 1st, which is a quirk of, because the assembly was over 2 months, basically, how when they start. But and both Secretary-elect Mills and Presiding Bishop-elect Curry are both team candidate, and I think that's that we haven't had those before either in these positions.
And team is
It's Keith, can
I'll,
you?
I'm even on a candidacy committee and I mess up the acronym every time. But basically, it is someone who comes into rostered ministry in the ELCA by what's considered a non-traditional path. So rather than somebody who goes to college, gets a bachelor's degree, maybe they, have a career of some sort or not, but then they go, to seminary essentially as graduate school, get a master's in divinity, and are ordained as a pastor or a deacon. A team candidate is someone who may or may not have been to college, but either doesn't have a bachelor's degree, maybe has an associate's, or has not is not in a place in their life where they are able to go to seminary and get that master's degree. And so, but rather than allowing, just anybody to become ordained in the ELCA, they go through a similar candidacy process, but they have a more limited, or more, I should say, probably a more focused education on those things that enable them to get into their area of ministry. And it's particularly team candidates, a couple of things. They tend to be lifted up by a specific community to lead that community. So whether that is a community of persons of a particular ethnic background in an urban setting, for example, or perhaps a small rural setting, and where so you don't have someone, they're having a hard time perhaps drawing or employing a pastor, let's say full time, and so someone from that community is lifted up and identified as this team candidate, and they become that community's pastor, and that's where they are ordained into. But having them been ordained, after that call concludes, in whatever manner it may, they're ready to or able to move on to any other position open to any other ordained person in the ELCA, including even presiding bishop, which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
I looked it up. It's Theological Education for Emerging Ministries is what.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and it's a fantastic program.
Yeah.
And hopefully this shines a light on, because we have a lot of folks that may feel the call after they've done work, kind of otherwise, right? And then
Mhm.
they say, I'm feeling this call, but I don't really want to go back and do all this,
Right.
schooling
Three,
and all
four,
this stuff.
5 years of classwork and an
Hmm.
internship and quit my job and move my
Hmm.
family. And yeah.
Well, and presiding Bishop-elect Curry mentioned in his speech, and acceptance speech, if you will, he mentioned that he had lots of careers before that. He had his own business. I forget what his industry was. Was he an accountant or something like that?
He
But
was a
then
teacher as well.
a
Yeah.
teacher.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
he has all these things, and the last thing he really needs is to have to go to school to,
Right.
well, because you add a 4-year degree onto seminary, and you've got 8 years of a lot of discernment. And when you've already discerned, it's frustrating to have that. I can
Mm.
speak to that from experience here
Yeah.
lately, right, Keith?
Right.
Uh, but so we've got, we've got these. They're not really shortcuts. They're ways
No.
for the church to respond to gifts,
Correct. Yeah.
and we have
It's
not had those very much.
yeah, it's just a
Um,
different kind of path.
when
So
Keith went to
on
seminary, they tried to discourage people from going to seminary because of the financial aspect.
Right. And
right.
so, and
Most
also it's
seminaries are inexpensively or free now anymore with lots of scholarship opportunities.
Yeah.
right. And team seems to be a way that actually the church is meeting people kind of where they're at and seeing what's going on in the country.
Yeah. Ian Brown, I'm curious
Uh,
because you're in a position of leadership in the LCA. I'm curious your perspective on the position of vice president in particular, and that it is, as you mentioned, open to either an ordained or non-ordained member of the ELCA. So it could be anybody.
You mean the secretary? You're talking about
Yes, I'm so
secretary.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, secretary.
Yeah. And secretary is interesting because, after all, the current occupant of the office is a deacon.
Mhm.
And it is, unfortunately, it's the only officer position, or it's deacon and treasurer are the only officer, or I'm sorry, secretary and treasurer are the only officer positions that a deacon can be. When they were considered lay, they could be synod vice presidents, but not the case anymore. And of course, they cannot be presiding bishop. And so, but one of the things that's very interesting about that position of secretary is it does require a kind of a very kind of a very specific skill set, right? And
Hmm.
so we don't want to kind of shut ourselves off from the skills of someone who's a deacon, and Deacon Sue Rothmeyer has a encyclopedic knowledge of the constitutions and bylaws and continuing resolutions. I mean, I swear there is no one in this church that knows them as much as she does, and if she was denied the opportunity to run for it, that would be that would be a loss. And so it's one of those. Now Secretary-elect Mills is a minister of word and sacrament, and also she is also African descent. So she is the first African descent or person of color that is in the office of secretary as well. But to have kind of that open, and the person that finished in third, his name is Josh Tatum, and he is a layperson. He is a synod attorney in the Indiana Kentucky Synod. He's at a law firm, and he has kind of those skills, separate sort of skills as well. And so I think it's one of those things that it's great that it's open, and it's something that I think is a good idea. And so I'm glad that we've had over the history of the ELCA, we've had a layperson in that role, right? David Swartland. We've had a deacon in the role, Deacon Sue Rothmeyer, and we've had, of course, ministers of word and sacrament. So
So about these roles, will they? So Bishop Curry, he's bishop now in Metro Chicago, so
yes.
he doesn't need to move. But does the secretary live in Chicago? Is that an expectation, or is
Yep.
that?
So that's an expectation. Yeah. Secretary-elect Mills is currently lives in North Carolina, and the expectation she'll move to Chicago and go into the Lutheran Center, and her office is on the 11th floor, the same as the presiding bishop's office, and so they'll be just down the hall from each other. And then the treasurer is a few floors down. I think she's on floor 6 or so. So funny enough, I was talking to the treasurer, Lori Fedek, when I mentioned, now you're the only non-person of color that's an officer of the ELCA, which she thought was a great thing as well. So yeah, it's interesting how one assembly has kind of flipped the script, so to speak. And then also, of course, we had other elections, right? Half the church council gets elected every churchwide assembly. The It used to be that used to have every 2 years, right, for churchwide assemblies. So they'd do a third, a third, a third, and then when they went to every 3, they did a half and a half, which is not the best because just when people start to learn how to do things, they got to go. So we elected half of the church council this time around, and so we'll be I'll be meeting them when we onboard them in the next church council meeting when we're all together in Minneapolis in October, because we're going to meet right before the installation of presiding bishop-elect Curry, which is on October 4th in Minneapolis at Central Lutheran. 2 p.m. You can come if you're in the area, or if you want to fly there, that's fine too.
I'm guessing it'll be live streamed.
Yes, it will be live streamed. That is for sure. So you can do that too. You can watch it from the comfort of your own couch.
Imran, remind me again, how many people serve on church council, churchwide?
Well, it can vary, but it's roughly around. So at least half of the synods, right, will send. So they go back and forth. So it's kind of like 30. So I guess it's 32 because from synods, and then we can add at-larges based on certain things that we would like to. So church council decides what we need. Do we need a general at-large? Do we need a specific at-large? So this time around, we asked for an at-large member that had financial experience, and we asked for an at-large member that had legal experience. So those are two at-larges that were elected this time around. So it's around 35, and I have to look at the numbers to see if that's where we are still. If I think and see if there's any other at-larges that we have from before, but it's right around that number. And then there's liaison bishops that are not full members, but they are constitutionally required to be there, I guess. One for each region. And then we have advisory members, which are presidents of the ethnic specific associations, as well as the president of reconciling works. So those make up kind of the church council, but those advisory members have voice but no vote. The liaison bishops have voice but no vote. There's 35 folks that have voice and vote, and they're made up from the synods and a few at-larges.
Gotcha. Thanks. And so those elected members of the council are 6-year terms?
Yes, that's a 6-year term, no opportunity for re-election unless you're an at-large and we decide to do another at-large. But
Gotcha.
yeah, because what happens is after the 6 years, because you're paired with another synod, it goes to the other synod.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
So let's see, other various boards and commissions and stuff.
No.
I'm sure there were lots of appointments to different things.
So if anyone has been to a churchwide assembly, you'll know there's something called a common ballot. And there is, 20 of those on the common ballot are church council, or maybe a little more. Yeah, 20 of them are church council, or a little less than that. And then the other ones were, the Board of Appeals and the nominating committee and those sort of things. And then you have all the separately incorporated ministry boards. So like the ELCA Foundation, and some of those are uncontested, but some of them are, but it ends up being like, it's like 100-page document or something like that. And I'm pretty sure that by the end, people are just kind of going, eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't suggest that people have not read all the bio forms, but I would not be surprised. There's a lot of people on that list. And everyone has a bio form, obviously. And so, there's a lot of reading, and sometimes people don't realize it until it's 3 days out and these sort of things. But yeah, we elected quite a few things that were there. So, and then those happen. A lot of those folks aren't in the room, and so they get informed about it after the fact, or hopefully they get an email. I'm not entirely sure. But.
So stepping back to
Yeah.
the elections of the presiding bishop and the secretary, were there people who were nominated who had interesting stories? I always imagine that, like, I was thinking myself, like, what if somebody had to get a hold of me, but I'm at band camp at Bowling Green State University? Would Bishop Chris know how to contact me? So are there any interesting stories that come from that, or is it usually pretty well known?
I mean, sometimes people get missed, but a lot of times what happens is that those folks maybe don't get that many votes. So in the end, it doesn't matter as
Right.
much, right?
Yeah.
Um, there was a weird situation for secretary where someone on the first ballot that had a lot of votes pulled their name out.
Mm.
However, there was another person on the ballot that had the same last name and a very similar first name
Yeah.
that picked up those votes. And so we had to redo the second ballot because it's like you have to like that's not the same person. Like just so you know, right? So that was an interesting thing that happened, but it wasn't, it wasn't that someone wasn't contacted and then just totally didn't think.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing that happened was in the bishop election. For those of you who watched, they all did theirs on Zoom, you notice, because one of the candidates couldn't make it out to Phoenix in time. And so, as a show of solidarity, the rest of the top seven decided that they would also do theirs at Zoom in one of the conference or one of the rooms down in the
Yeah.
Phoenix Convention Center. And so that was a something I had not witnessed before. One of the things I would ask or your listeners to look at was during the secretary election of the top seven, Keith Fry, who's currently in the office of the secretary, discerned that, you know what, at overnight he said, the spirit is not calling me to this. And he gave this absolutely amazing speech, and it's
It
probably one of the best 4-minute speeches I've ever heard.
it was excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was he's saying that he was not called to this, but then he talked about what would make a good secretary, and taking the attributes of previous secretaries, and it was just very very beautiful. And so Keith is actually retiring at the end of this year from his role.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the spirit. Sometimes will move in weird, interesting ways, and Keith was open to it. He just kind of the spirit. He thought the spirit was telling him to put his name in. Then he realized no.
Well, in the way that speech worked, because he starts with the attributes of prior
You
secretaries,
know,
and it really sounded like he was setting up that these are the attributes, and I'm going to show you how I fit all those things.
mm,
And then the brakes hit, and he's like, "But
yeah,
this isn't me."
yeah,
And it was just so honest, and I felt for him.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
so heartfelt, and that's not an easy speech to give because somebody has voted for you and feels that you deserve to be there. If you're in the top seven,
Mm,
there are a number of people, and so you are potentially letting some people down who right? And
right.
so that's a very brave thing to do, and I was admiring that. So
Yeah.
Thanks.
so let's see. We also dealt with statements. We have
Mm,
a new statement of faith and civic life,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Social statement. Yeah, on faith and civic life that we voted on and approved. Yeah. And so that was, this has been something that's been a lot of work. And I think that the folks that were involved in that task force did a great job. And so I know a lot of people, especially over the last year or two, have been really clamoring for, hey, do we have something that we can use when people say, why are you talking about politics? Not in a partisan way, but why are you talking about politics?
Mhm.
Right.
And this social statement really addresses that head on.
Yeah.
It also denounces Christian nationalism in the document as well, which I was happy to see. And so those things really were important. And I think that I was glad that it passed, and it was something that passed overwhelmingly. So now it's a part of the social statements of the church.
Excellent. We also
Yeah.
updated the human sexuality gift and trust with language that fits modern situations
Yeah.
of particularly dealing with queer marriage,
Mhm.
those things. So
Yeah. So in that one, and Roger Willer, who's the head of theological ethics at the church organization, has been tried to be very clear about this and has said it over and over again. That the reevaluation of human sexuality as a two-step process, right? There were 3 years ago there were two. There was a resolution from Representative Council, and there was a memorial as well. And the memorial had to do with updating the language because Human Sexuality, Gift, and Trust came out in 2009. That was before same-sex marriage. So it has a lot of awkward language to avoid necessarily saying marriage because that wasn't the legal position of the country. And so part of this was to update that language to add marriage to make it clearer in those respects. It was they called it a non-substantive change, right? Now there was a resolution as well that was brought up about looking into the bound conscience positions, the four bound conscience positions. The same task force that did this work on human sexuality, gift, and trust is working now on those bound conscience positions. And this task force includes members that are of all four positions as well. And so they're going to start working on it this fall, but they wanted to make sure that they got the kind of that non-substantive language out first so they could really dedicate themselves to this work, which is going to be probably a little more difficult
Yeah.
to say the least.
Yeah. Keith, do you want to talk about what bound conscious means, or
Uh,
I can do it?
I'm going to be taxed on the details,
Hmm.
specifically the four positions, because I have it's even fairly recently in the last year. I know I read this statement, and but it's not language that sticks in my head. So, bound conscience is the notion that, especially at the time when this was adopted, there was not consensus on what the ELCA says or believes, I think would be a fair statement, about the status of human sexuality, especially people in the queer community who are in, what back in those days were called like open, loving relationships, and whether that is considered a sin or not. And so the concept of bound conscience was to, it's some people would say it was brilliant, some would say it was frustrating, some would say it was wrong, which I think is why it's being reevaluated now. That we did not need to agree, and we could still be together as church. So some folks believe, this way of being is sinful. Some folks do not, and then some folks are somewhere in the middle. And bound conscience would permit you to, hold your own belief, and yet also hold one another as siblings in Christ in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Did I fudge that well enough to make sense?
And particularly, it allows congregations, particularly, and clergy, particularly, not to perform same-sex weddings.
Right.
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 Is
Or
kind of the root of it.
congregations, yeah,
Right.
or congregations to call, pastors who are, say, gay and married. Right.
Yeah.
It was still and not have their synod say, but you have to call whatever candidate we put before you. You always have a choice in candidates anyway, so it's a little wonky. But
But there's that perception that the synod controls who the candidate is, and
sure,
a lot of people in the call process at congregations think that the synod gives you two bad candidates and one that they want.
Mm.
Right. I mean, that's the perception.
Sure, yeah.
It's not really true.
Right.
yeah,
But
we
but a
don't
lot
really
of times
have
the call
three
committee
candidates to
thinks
give
that.
them anymore. But
Right.
yeah,
Right. And
So
I will say, and then the thought was, it was a compromise at the time because people weren't on the same page, and so it's a good time to revisit it and just to see, how can this actually be made into something that makes sense now.
Mm.
And people think that it's already a done deal, it's been decided, then it's going to be, and if you hold to certain positions, you will be ostracized, but nothing has been decided yet. I mean, it's like I said, there's people from all four positions on the task force, and what I hear, they have a fantastic working relationship, all of them, and so they're going to start working on that now and see what comes out of it, and so. I don't know what's going to come out of it, but I'm hopeful.
we'll see in Des Moines
Yeah.
yeah,
in 2028,
right.
where everyone wants to go in July. So, yeah.
Wait,
So also we had
I thought
I
it
don't
was in
know, it wasn't a
Indianapolis.
statement, but it was a resolution about justice for Palestinians and Israelis.
Yeah.
And
So
so,
that was one of the memorials that was separately taken out of the en bloc resolution and discussed. And so it was it was kind of something that was talked about quite intently. So the interesting thing that happened is that there was the Memorials Committee took out a certain statement, and then a bunch of folks wanted to be substituted for another statement. And so the Morris Committee said, okay, that's fine. We think this one might be a better as a substitute. So, and the substitute kind of asks, the presiding bishop to kind of talk or send a letter and speak out about what's going on in Palestine and about denouncing the genocide that's happening in Gaza and talking about, trying to advocate for peace in the region. And so kind of that was a memorial that was discussed, and it was pretty intently discussed. But I think that the original memorial, a lot of people thought it didn't necessarily go far enough because it talked about, affirming what the church is already doing, and a lot of people wanted a little bit more than that. And so the substitute was something that I think a lot of people more jived with, right? And so that one kind of passed because it was more action oriented and kind of saying, "Hey, let's do things to try to, to try to make sure that we stand against, the continuing war and the genocide that's happening." And so, yeah, that was kind of a big discussion that we did and passed.
Yeah. So those were the big things I think
Mhm.
that hit the news, at least in ELCA channels.
Well, there was
What,
the other thing too, right? The commission.
oh,
The
right, the
big,
commission stuff.
the
Yeah.
big thing, the commission. Well, supposedly the big thing, but it didn't really have as much impact, and it might have been because of the elections, right? But
Right.
the Commission for Renewed Lutheran Church came up with 13 recommendations early this year, and we, as church council, forwarded, I think it was 7 of them for constitutional change,
Because
and
some of them
then
didn't need to go to churchwide assembly. Some of those were
correct.
acted on directly by council, right?
Right, and the church council acted on 6 of them, I believe, and we actually did. And I spoke about one in my report that we authorized the Association of Synod Vice Presidents, and so we were able to do that by continuing resolution, which church council can do by itself. And there's some other things church council did was there's going to be a task force of interdependence and purpose, which is really going to dig into do how many synods should we have. It was and what should they be doing? It was kind of a task that this commission thought was a little too. I mean, they did kind of the groundwork and the laying of the foundation. They said we need a smaller, more focused group to work on this part. There was also a financial coordinating task force done
Right.
to kind of make sure that. So that was all passed by church council. There was some that were constitutional amendments that were involved, and they went through. I mean, one of the things was we added to the Constitution as continuing resolutions. We added some DEIA language, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. But there was one part that had to be a constitutional approval, and then there was one part of the constitutional approval that was taken out. So one of the things the commission suggested was that the church council should have the ability to approve a constitutional change that was approved at a churchwide assembly, and then it goes into effect, right? As
Instead of
opposed
waiting
to
another
waiting.
3 years.
That's right. And that got pulled out, and that was a very long discussion. And in the end, there was no vote on it. There was no consensus on it. And I think I know you're probably going to ask it, but if nothing happens with it, and it automatically goes to the church council to decide what to do with it. And but of course, the question is if it's a constitutional change, the church council might not be able to do it itself, right?
Right.
So, but yeah, that took up a lot of time as well in that respect. And so there was no real consensus on that. Some people really thought that it would speed things up. And then other people said, you know what, we should really take our time to discuss base constitutional changes,
Well,
especially if we're thinking about doing how many synods we got.
so there's an irony then if church council then approves a measure that allows them to change the Constitution by changing the Constitution.
Well, the Churchwide Assembly had to vote on it,
Right.
first of all, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, so I'm not, I mean, so part of the issue was people brought up amendments, and
Right.
then folks were like, well, what does this really mean? And the Office of the Secretary and the Legal Counsel say, we don't really know. Like, we need time to actually look at this. So,
Right.
I think what we did end up approving on that, I was incorrect in saying we did nothing on that. I think we agreed to refer it
Okay.
to the Office of the Secretary just to see because one of the questions that rose up was what happens if the church council votes no? Does it automatically just go the same process, go back to the churchwide assembly? And the legal counsel, Tom, kind of said, "Well, I don't know. I mean, actually, I don't know if it goes back to the next. That might kill it." And so people were like, "Oh, wait a second." And it's like we need more time to actually review it and find out what this
Yeah.
does.
Hmm.
So yeah, and then of course, the friend of the podcast, Carla Christopher, she gave a report with Leon Schwartz on the commission, did a
Yeah.
fantastic job. So yeah, it was good to see them, and they did some very significant work. So
Yeah.
Hmm.
That was fun to see. The thing that I saw a lot of talk about was a suggestion. I think it was a memorial to increase youth participation in, was it churchwide activities, or
Oop,
I was unclear. I just heard
right.
the objections and things to it. So
So right now there's a goal of 10% of all bodies, right? So that's everything. That's not just churchwide, but synod level, etc. Have to be made. There's a goal of 10% youth and young adult. So the resolution was to make it 20% as a goal, right? Not as a
and let's
mandate.
define that. So youth and young adult.
Yeah.
So what is the bottom age for youth?
I think the bottom age for youth is it confirmation age? Is there any real bottom? I think it's
There
just
may not
confirmation
be.
age.
Okay.
Um, but I think there might be a minimum
So
of
they'd have to be
12
a
or
confirmed
something.
member. That would be a
Right.
minimum.
So I
Okay.
think it's a 12, maybe the minimum, and it goes up to 30.
It used to be
I want to,
35 for young adult.
yeah, it might be 35.
And I think that's a national or an international thing for
Mm,
like the Lutheran bodies. So
yeah. So that was something that required or a lot of conversation. I mean, the other thing, and one of the reasons that makes that interesting, is one of the continuing resolutions the church council passed was what we call the HUG, historically underrepresented groups. So one of the things that the commission recommended, or one of the things actually that the DEIA audit recommended. Remember last churchwide assembly, they asked for a DEIA audit of the governing documents.
okay.
They recommended that in addition to 10% people of color, we do an additional 10% of historically underrepresented groups. And that could be people of color, that could be LGBTQIA, that could be youth, socioeconomic. And so, yeah, so that was passed. And then, of course, then we have an additional goal of youth membership. And so the interesting conversation was, people were arguing against it, but it was funny. The youth were all arguing for it and kind of saying, if you want to show youth that they're valued, this is one way to do that, right?
Right.
And a lot of the folks that were against it were saying, well, we can't get them to show up, speaking of youth and young adults, and so it was kind of this back and forth that it didn't really, like, there was no, unfortunately, there was no real meeting of the minds there. I mean, personally, I think it's probably a good idea, but, people were kind of going back and forth on it in a way that was very
Well, and there
um,
were questions that
aggressive.
if it's a minor, are they able to participate in these things?
Mm,
Because some of these committees deal with employment stuff and contracts and things like that. And the assumption is that youth and young adult is going to be under 18,
right.
but there are
Well,
plenty of law school graduates that are 32.
exactly so. Yeah, and there was on the last day, someone did do an apology for kind of some of the words that were used against youth and young adults. Kind of there were these very like unfortunate. I will say unfortunate, but probably should say something even stronger. Words about how young folks basically don't understand these things, or
Mm. Yeah.
they aren't mature enough to handle these things. And when you're talking about young adults as well, like it's pretty offensive.
Right.
Right.
Magically at 35 years old, you
That's right.
develop a sense of community or something. Yeah.
That's right.
Mm.
Don't you know that? Of course.
So yeah, people were pretty keyed up on that. And I think that's part of, if I remember right, on Friday, was it Friday or Saturday? There was a bunch of speaking. I think it was on Saturday before everybody
Mm.
left. That there was a lot of talk, people bringing up motions to apologize and
Oh
that sort
yeah,
of
yeah.
stuff. And it seemed like it took hours.
It did. It
And
did. I
yeah,
mean, it did not actually take hours, but yes, it felt
but
like
it pushed a lot of business
it did.
back, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So what happens to all those things that didn't get talked about during the churchwide assembly?
So they go to church council. Basically, the church council, whatever it can do, right? Because if it's a constitutional amendment, the church council can't do
Right.
anything really with it.
Right.
But the resolutions and memorials, the church council decides. And Bishop Eaton said from the podium, by the way, just so you know, as a reminder,
Yeah.
these things will go to church council. And then, if I recall correctly, I think like the conversation for something went really quick. And it might have been the referring of something to the secretary, right? And that went super quick when people realized, oh, wait a second, this is going to go to church council, and we want to have a say in it. So,
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that
but
was,
And
so we'll have to deal with it.
how often again does church council meet?
Church council meets twice a year. No, the executive committee of church council meets every month, but the church council itself, which will have to deal with, all these things, will meet. This year we're going to meet in October for 2 days. It's an abbreviated meeting because we have the installation, but then we meet in the spring. So we meet once in the spring, once in the fall. So
Gotcha. Thank
well, that'll be fun. You'll have 2 days to go through all that stuff, huh?
that's right. Yeah.
you.
And we have to orient some new folks as well. So,
So,
Hmm.
so do you have like a get to know you game already picked out?
no, I just show up. I don't run that one, but I think I help. I
But don't you
help. I
wish you
get
did?
no, I don't wish I did. um,
Time for the party games.
that's right.
Right.
But so a lot of those things will be. But one of the things I mentioned is the unblock stuff, right? That's
Right.
all. That has all ended up passing, right? A lot of those things. So people might ask, whatever happened to this memorial? And it's like, well, it was in the en bloc and no one took it out. So, whatever the memorial committee recommended
And
with
that
it,
was
that's what happened.
and that was 90 some pages, if I remember right,
That
of the
was a
en bloc.
substantial amount of pages. Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, 90 might be underselling it in the end. I don't
That
know.
could be.
Because he had a supplemental report as well. But yeah, so those things and the something will come out on the website, I'm sure, by in a few weeks or so, detailing all the stuff that happened. But
And and
the
Living
folks have to
Lutheran
do this.
has things day by day, the motions that happen and things that get kicked back to the next day or the next plenary session,
Right.
and that sort of stuff. So some really interesting speeches. So for anybody that wants to go back through and see what happens, the speeches that happen in was it plenary session 3, I think, is when the 7 folks speak.
Yeah,
Um,
that might be right. Yeah. Either,
for Bishop, and then later it's going to be like 7 or 8 for the secretaries.
yeah.
Those speeches really inform us of where people in leadership positions, because everybody who makes it to that stage is in some form a leader in the church, whether they're laity or clergy or an officer or works in churchwide offices. They have a perspective on the church, and they have a reason for wanting to be part of that and help lead the national church. And so those speeches tell us a lot of things. Tells us a lot about which way we're headed, even if they're not elected to those positions, and they're influential. The other thing was Bishop Eaton's speech that she gave. So her final report, and yours too, but Bishop Eaton, I actually used her in a sermon this past Sunday,
Yeah.
because she, at one point, she looked like she was just throwing the boxing gloves down and was going to go, straight fist on this. And she she said that the church needs to be, the ELCA needs to be better at identifying ourselves as doing the work of Christ. And that if we can't do that, that there are plenty of, she quoted a former bishop as saying, there are plenty of like social justice working atheists out there that are
Yeah.
doing a wonderful job.
Mhm.
And so we have to be committed to our distinct mission of being equipped to spread the word and the sacrament. And that if we stop focusing on that and we get lost in all the other side stuff, that we may as well just close our doors.
No.
She was very frank about that, and it was a really good speech. It was startling. You don't want to hear the presiding bishop say, one of the options on the table is we could just close down right now.
Yeah.
But she was being frank and in a position, and I think I commented on Facebook on one of your things that I appreciated seeing her in an unscripted place. I mean, she was
Mhm.
scripted, but she was speaking from her heart, not representing the church directly.
Yeah.
She stepped aside from that role and spoke as Elizabeth Eaton, as opposed to the presiding bishop, and I really appreciated that. And I think it's a speech that has been separated out, so you can find just that speech on YouTube, and we'll have a link to it. But I really appreciated that talk.
Yeah. And she's kind of said a little bit of that here and there
Yeah.
in various, and I think they even wrote a Living Lutheran article on it. But that's been something that she's kind of very focused on, and I'm glad that she kind of highlighted it in her last remarks. She had a report or her final report, but then she also had, we honored her, and then she spoke a little more afterwards too. And same thing with Secretary Rothmeier. But yeah, I mean, this was something that's very dear to her heart about, kind of, the Rotary Club does good things. She likes using the Rotary Club does good things, right? How are we different than the Rotary Club, right?
Mhm.
What is our reason for being, sort of thing? And that
Yeah.
that came through, I think, and I hope it touched people a little bit as well.
Well, it did me, so
Yeah.
you can share that if you see her at the. I don't think I'm making it to St. Paul or Minneapolis for in October, but you never know.
You never know.
Yeah. So let's see. Anything else? So the next
Mm.
churchwide assembly is in Des Moines, Iowa. That will be
Right.
we'll be electing a new vice president, perhaps, or maybe
We'll
see
have
somebody run for reelection.
one of
It's
those
a bit
two.
off.
One
Yeah.
of those two. But yes, there will be a vice president election. It's
Are
going to
there
be
other officers too? Treasurer or
no treasurer is elected by the church council. At
okay.
some point, the church council decided the treasurer needs so specific knowledge
Yeah.
that it was better for the church council to make that decision. And Lori Fedek did get elected to another term by the church council, or no, 6-year term. I want to say last year. So yes, there'll be a vice president election. We'll be talking about the second part of human sexuality, gift, and trust. It will be Bishop Curry's first assembly as chair. So it'll be we'll see, and then whatever happens in the next 3 years, right? Anything can happen. You can a curveball can be thrown, or something happens in the world that we need to deal with. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. But we'll be in Des Moines. So
we'll be in
that's
Des Moines.
yeah. Get your reservations now. And so we'll have links to anything that we've got links for in the episode notes. As always, it's a pleasure to talk with you face to face here over Zoom. To be fair with everybody else, your presence on social media on Reddit is fabulous. It is great to see somebody active and participating and getting people talking about things.
It gives
Whether or
us a
not we
lot
all
of
agree.
content.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Well, no, thank you. I appreciate it. And that's kind of something I hope for when I got into the role. I said, a lot of people in the congregation level says, I don't know any, I don't know what's going on in Churchwide. No one talks to us in Churchwide. And so I was like, well, why don't I actually talk to folks and, maybe evaporate some of those silo feelings and see what happens.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And hopefully it's working. Unfortunately, I think some of our congregations don't participate in those pieces, and so we still have some folks
Sure.
that need to be reached other ways. But That's not your job.
Right.
We'll do our best somehow, right?
We'll try to do that in some ways.
That's right. There you go. You have a role in this too.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people picking up. There are some new podcasts related to the LCA that are coming out in some video forms and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, we'll talk about more of that here in future episodes for sure. But
All good stuff.
it's great having you. I hope the weather in Atlanta's, well, you said it's 79 now, so
Yeah, it's
that
nice.
is,
It's kind of rainy, but aside from that, it's nice.
yeah,
All right.
all right.
Imran, thank you again so much for being with us one more time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
You know
We'll
where
do
to
it
find
again.
me.
That's right. We just file, we light up the signal.
That's
Yeah.
right.
All right. Well, thanks once again to Imran Siddiqui, Mr. Vice President. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And I know you're listening, so we hope we'll have you on again soon about nothing particularly controversial, because that would be great. But it's always been a delight, and we're so happy to have you as part of our church.
I think that should be our new tagline. Main Street Lutherans, nothing particularly controversial.
Might work. Might work. That might be controversial.
Might be.
We'll ask Reddit. All right. So we have another submission for our Better Know a Congregation. This is becoming one of our favorite things to do. We get to talk about congregations that are not ours. Well, eventually we'll get ours in there somewhere. But so we had Todd. Todd nominated his congregation. Keith, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, Todd attends Peace First Lutheran Church in Astoria, Oregon. And it's interesting that it's a merger congregation from two churches that originally had been named separately, Peace Lutheran Church and First Lutheran Church. So in the merger, they came up with the new name, Peace First Lutheran Church. They are, like I said, in Astoria, Oregon, which means they are a part of the Oregon Synod. The pastor there is the Reverend Stephen M. Kienberger. And they also have a youth and family minister named Dawson Mangles. The website of the congregation, if you want to look them up, is peacefirstlutheran.com. And I can tell you that it's such a unique name that when you start typing those first two portions of that in, Peace First, Google knows who you're looking for at that point. And they have 296 members in their congregation.
Yeah. Todd told us that they're very proud of their social justice book club, which looks like it has a new book for each month that they meet. They are studying the Heather Cox Richardson book that she wrote over the last several years here, and that's their next one. Their worship times are on Sundays. They have two services, 8:30 and 11, and they are both traditional services. Their mission is together in Christ we welcome all and seek to bring healing and wholeness, inclusivity, and blessings to our neighbors. We ask in our form, which you can find the link to in the episode notes here, what is a favorite song or hymn? And we didn't get an answer on that, but by watching some of the services during the summer, Peace First has a hymn sing-along. And so the beginning of the service, they ask for people to suggest hymn numbers, and they call them out. One of the services I watched, they said one of the prior weeks, a kid was there and they called out a random number, and it was a Christmas song that they ended up singing, but they sang it anyway. So that's fun. We also ask if the congregation had a mascot, what would it be? We didn't get an answer on that, but I can tell you that the high school are the Fighting Fishermen. And because of where Astoria is on the southern part of basically the delta, or the mouth of the Columbia River out in the Pacific Ocean, there is a lot of fishing out there. So that's perfectly appropriate. And it's not inappropriate for a church to consider themselves fishermen as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there you go. Fighting fishermen. Well, fighting for peace first might not seem so great, but that's all right. Fighting for peace fishermen. How's that?
Sending mixed messages there.
There you go. We also
Todd
asked.
said that he is especially proud of his congregation. He's fairly new to not only Peace First, but to the ELCA. He had grown up in his younger years in a more conservative upbringing, and then left the church for a bit. And then somewhere along the line discovered that there was, a wing of the church that was a more progressive experience than he was used to. And so when he got home to Washington, so Astoria does sit right on the border between Oregon and Washington. And so even though Todd lives apparently in Washington State, he goes to church in Oregon and really enjoyed this congregation. It's an RIC church, so they stand up for people of color and racial justice and the LGBTQ plus community. And he's really excited that the congregation and the pastor both show support for these communities. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, in fact, one of the churches when they merged together, the campus that they didn't keep was sold to a Latinx community organization. So it's now a community center for Latinx folks in the area, which they take a lot of pride in. Actually, we'll link to the video there on their YouTube channel. They have a video from the time of the merger that went through the history of all the Lutheran churches, how they combined together to make up what is now Peace First Lutheran Church in Astoria. It's a really neat little thing, about 11 minutes, and it's worth taking a look at. See how that does, and then maybe think about doing that for your own congregation. That'd be a lot of fun there, and very useful, I think, for putting things into perspective. Let's see.
Thanks, Todd, for reaching out to Main Street Lutherans, for listening, and for contributing information about Peace First Lutheran Church. Glad to hear from you.
Yeah. So Main Street Lutherans is hosted by Keith Fair and Ben Fote, and the show is produced by Fote Media Productions. Find all our contact information, links, and a transcript, and a link to our t-shirt, and a link to nominate your congregation or synod in the episode notes. Until next time, go in peace, serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.